Chapter 5 The Tour. The fire in front of them was of great comfort after the bitterness of the trail leading to the village. Its warmth even managed to melt away the despair they'd felt whilst traversing the castle grounds. This feeling was helped in part by the fire's inhabitants. Within its lush red and yellow flames, miniature figures sang and played along to the music. The group watched, enchanted, as one new character blasted away the previous one, or hit it over the head with a lump of firewood. One Valkyrie singer was determined to stay and flitted about the hearth, still singing her song long after the music had changed. Before long, a mob of characters who had been denied their chance to play had amassed and were chasing the Valkyrie with fire pitchforks and spades. Seeking to avoid a well-flung spark, the Valkyrie accidentally flew out of the hearth and singed the table. Looking most embarrassed, she meandered sheepishly over to Guillaume's marshmallow, toasted it, and dove back into the fire, disappearing in a puff of smoke and ash. Guillaume didn't hesitate. Eagerly popping the warm marshmallow into his mouth, he applauded the Valkyrie's performance, whilst the other characters argued amongst themselves over whose turn it was next. Tallis smiled. "I'm glad you enjoy the entertainment. I while away many hours in front of the fire, watching the fire sprites play for me. You should see their Shakespeare." Rising confidently up from the table with a debonair swish of his cloak, Tallis continued, "Come, let me give you a tour." Freya gave a swooning sigh. "You are quite the gentleman," she said, shooting Requiem a pointed glare before beaming at Tallis. Urasil was far more practical. "You're not going to show us the whole castle, are you? We'll be here for the rest of the year, just getting through the first floor." Requiem frowned at Urasil before turning to Tallis. "Don't mind him. He gets homesick. Can't bear to be away from his dark and dingy castle full of books for too long, or he gets withdrawal symptoms which manifest themselves as rudeness." "Ha!" laughed Tallis dismissively. "I am no way offended, nor am I going to show you even as much as a wing or a floor. However," Tallis turned to give Urasil a vindictive smile, "I'm sure we can pass the library and compare it to yours." Suddenly, the peace was shattered by a loud, melodic shrill bursting from the fire. With a flurry of sparks and a crackling of wood, out flew the Valkyrie. It appeared that she had taken a liking to Guillaume as she flitted around his shoulders, hovering above them so as not to burn him. At only 5 or 6 inches tall, the Valkyrie was nearly as round as she was stumpy. She radiated a pleasant warmth which was outshone only by her brilliant smile. Straining to look at her, Guillaume smiled and picked up a handful of marshmallows, passing one up for her to toast. Tallis's menacing demeanour softened. "I see you have a friend. Be sure not to turn too fast, or she'll burn your face," he warned politely. At this, Guillaume struggled to swallow his marshmallow. He turned gingerly to the Valkyrie, who smiled back at him whilst holding out another perfectly toasted specimen. His concern evaporated, and, through a full mouth, he said kindly, "Suffering a burnt face is a small price to pay for such exquisite marshmallows." Guillaume patted the Valkyrie on the head to thank her, soon realising his mistake. Sucking his singed fingers, he smiled timidly at Tallis and waved with his reddened hand. "There is plenty of snow outside to cool your fingers if you wish." "You could take the marshmallows with you," replied Tallis, nearly breaking a smile at Guillaume's outstanding stupidity. Perhaps feeling that Requiem's friends were merely impulsive rather than rude, Tallis beckoned his guests with a shallow bow and opened his cloak toward the wall. "Please, this way." The group tore their unified gaze of despair from Guillaume and turned to follow Tallis. As they got closer to the wall, it began to melt. The great works of art, the gold frames, even the wood panelling liquefied and oozed slowly downwards. A dazzling bright light caused all except Tallis, who stood defiant, to shield their eyes as the outline of floor-to-ceiling panelled doors burned their way through. The light intensified until all but Tallis could look no more. Still arching away from the wall, the back of his hand covering his eyes, Gio felt a soft thud on his cheek and heard a quiet, high-pitched giggle. He slowly lowered his hand and looked to his right. Seeing that she had Gio's attention, the Valkyrie quickly toasted the marshmallow she had prodded him with and held it out with her usual smile. Gio smiled back sheepishly as he took the marshmallow from her and stood upright, feigning a bad back to explain his earlier pose. In front of him, Talis stood gazing at his magnificent doors hewn of black wood. "You have to tell me how you do that. I need some doors hanging at my place. I just never seem to find the time. Always worry they'll look wonky," Gio said innocently, his mouth full of marshmallow. Requiem, Freya and Uracil looked nervously at Talis, but he didn't even flinch. "I could send my architect along to have a look for you." Turning to Gio with a glint in his eye and a dark smile revealing his pointed white teeth, Talis ended the absurd notion. But the price would be grave indeed. Having thus silenced Gio, Talis walked them through the doors. The very doors they were sure they had used to come in. But instead of walking into the grand entrance, they found themselves in a long, moonlit corridor. Their every footstep echoed on the checkered floor of blood-red and jet-black tiles, as if the corridor had no end. This appeared quite plausible, as all they could see in front of Talis was a moonlit haze, a fog that kept them guessing, revealing no more secrets with every advancing step than it stole back as it filled in behind them. Instinctively, they knew that what they left behind and did not see was not for them to seek. At least, not if they ever wanted to leave. Captivated by the intrigue that exuded from every nook and cranny of the Black Palace, Requiem stopped to look out of one of the many windows that sat in Gothic arches lining the corridor on both sides. The moon was full and bright. It appeared to be so close that Requiem felt he could touch it. Perhaps it was because they were so very high. The walkway they were travelling through spanned two of the highest spires which thrust aggressively skywards. Looking down, Requiem could barely recognise the gargantuan proportions of the palace below. Seeing Requiem's perplexity, Uracil also looked out of the windows. He was not a great fan of heights, and this could have been all too much for him if it wasn't for— "Ha! Those great oaf doormen are arguing at the front gate," he said with a mocking glee. "What?" asked Freya curiously. She too looked out and down to see two tiny grey masses dancing about on the ground far below them. The wings, arms and legs of the giant vampires flailed about as they argued, looking like no more than random lines darting out of nondescript grey blobs. Talis stopped and chuckled. "You'll have to excuse Romulus and Remus. They do enjoy arguing like an old married couple. I wouldn't worry, though. I've never seen either of them come to harm. Once, a foolhardy adventurer even fired a missile at Remus. Romulus took the blow to his wing with not a scratch on him." Sighing, Talis added, "Of course, Remus then argued with Romulus, saying that it made him look stupid in front of the Hafuna. By the time they had finished arguing, the adventurer had long since gone. He did leave a good book behind, however, so there was no need to send Odin after him." "What makes you think Odin would have found him?" asked Gio through another mouthful of marshmallow. Talis turned his head so that the brilliance of his eyes could be seen behind the high collar of his cape as he delivered his calm reply. "Beyond this village is a desert of snow. Before you could make it to the next dark oasis in this inhospitable land, Odin would have picked up your scent and outrun any vehicle you may be using. You can't use a plane, as it is impossible to fly here. That is, unless you are a giant stone vampire. So you see, here I am the master. Be it through Odin or my gatekeepers, I'll get you if you are within a few hundred miles of the Black Palace." There was something sinister in Talis's voice. His use of the word "you" in his rhetoric sounded rather like a warning. None of them could deny, however, that he had a point, and all took a mental note to not do anything stupid. Of course, some have short-lived memories. Freya gave Gio a look that he understood and obeyed immediately. They followed Talis in silence, wondering just what they had got themselves into. Ah, here we are. Look, feeble Akatsuki, what do you make of this? Proudly, Talis threw open his arms at what looked to be a dead end. The giant black wood double doors, to which they were quickly becoming accustomed, burned their way through an oozing wall of stone and flung back to reveal yet another awe-inspiring room. How does this compare to your dark and dusty bookshelves? Everyone knew that Talis's comments were directed squarely at Urasil, who was still looking a little ragged after his journey with Odin. The term library hardly did the room justice. Urasil stumbled, barely able to contain his amazement, as he span in circles and stared up at the curved white bookshelves sitting against the walls of this round spire. Overcome and breathless, Urasil slumped in a window seat between two bookshelves as he pointed to books whilst mumbling, trying to comprehend how many this towering white library, with its gold ladders and landings, held. Ever the analytical Eastgater, Freya was less struck by the magnificence of the library scale, or its simple, yet elegantly carved wooden bookcases, and more with the windows that punctuated them and filled the pitched roof high above their heads. Forgetting herself, Freya walked over to a window and reached out to examine it. Whilst your architect is handling Gio's doors, can he get me some of these windows? Requiem couldn't believe that Freya had just pulled a Gio. They did not come to Mongolia to parley with a vampire for the services of his architect. Before Requiem could deliver his apologies, Talis walked over to Freya and spoke with a gentleness no one could have expected. Marvellous, aren't they? It is always a tranquil summer's day through this glass. If you open them, you can even hear the birds singing and feel the warm breeze in which they glide. Talis smiled at Freya's look of amazement as she touched the glass. Chuckling, he continued, After all, you can't read books in the dark, and what better to inspire you into another world than birdsong and a breeze? Pulling her gaze away from the window and looking at the library with her heart rather than her mind, Freya had to agree that the soft summer's light, the simple white furniture, and the comfortable warm breeze that wafted through the room culminated in the perfect environment to lose oneself in a book. With a satisfied look on his face, compounded by the look of utter disbelief and jealousy on Urasil's, Talis called out, I've been reading that adventurer's book of late. It's over there on the lectern. What do you make of it? Urasil walked over to a white wooden lectern in the shape of a demonic bat in mid-flight, its wings supporting an immense book. Urasil peered at it whilst a fireplace of white wood and red crystal erupted into life behind him. I've always wanted this book, he cried ecstatically, totally unfazed by the sudden eruption. I wasn't even sure if it truly existed. The path to the Inquisitor's library, the ultimate vault of knowledge. Interesting. I thought as much, replied Talis. Turning to Gio, who was still munching on marshmallows as he meandered around the library, he called, You, fat one, why don't you look? Gio, somewhat perturbed by the insult, puffed his way over to the book. Hunching over it, flames dripped off the Valkyrie and splashed onto its pages as he read. Uh-huh. If the Inquisitor is trying to tell us the perfect noodle recipe, he's all right by me, Gio said sarcastically, before walking away, pretending to be uninterested in the book. Talis addressed Requiem with a level of respect that he did not show to the others, with the possible exception of Freya. Why don't you look, Requiem? So, it's a book that shows you what you want to see, he asked, as he walked over and casually flicked through its pages. Not quite. It shows you something that will tantalise you. Something that will set your mind on fire and stir you into action. It is called the Book of Morpheus and Minerva, the gods of dreams and wisdom. It is said they came together and forged this book from the clouds of heaven and the grit of the earth. Knowing that what it tells is not only wondrous, but can truly be achieved, means that no one has ever been able to resist its words. Its words do not describe dreams. They describe attainable fortune. Talis paused to watch Requiem read its pages, relishing the moment, a moment that would change everything. It showed the traveller how to get here, and he could do nothing but follow its instructions. It tells the feeble one where to find the answers he is seeking, and the fat one the recipe. It tells the truth. If there is something you truly desire, and a way to get it, the book will tell you. The energy in Talis's voice was electrifying, and only matched by his outstretched, clenched fist, and the stark focus in his eyes, both of which Requiem could feel, even though he had not raised his head to see. "So I'm set to go on a culinary adventure if I read this book, am I?" said Kyo accusingly. "Surely I'm too fat already to even want to do such a thing." "The prospect excites, though, does it not? You too, feeble one. You can't deny that now you know that this book will lead you to all the answers you have ever sought, you are a whirl of emotion, aren't you?" "Let me see," exclaimed Freya as she ran towards the book. Before she could read, Requiem slammed it shut and tossed the book into the fire. Freya slapped Requiem hard on the face. "What did you do that for?" she shouted, the anger clear in her eyes. "For that very reason," replied Requiem calmly as he watched the book burn. "You would never have dared slap me before. Look at what it's done to you in such a brief moment." Talis appeared not to be angry as he walked to the fireplace. He spoke with dark undertones as he bent into the hearth. "You are strong, Requiem, throwing away such opportunity." Looking up at Requiem, he continued, "Or was what you saw in the pages of this book so frightening that you felt you could do nothing but try to burn its words and forget?" "That book is evil. It could bring down whole empires. It's better off burned for all our sakes," retorted Requiem with an equally cutting look in his eyes. Not wishing to ignite Requiem further, Talis looked back into the hearth and spoke in a whimsical tone. "You do not know how close you are to the truth. The last famous owner of this book was the Roman Empire. The book told them that complete world domination was possible. All they had to do was stretch themselves. As we know, they reached too far, too quickly, and, in reaching for the stars, lost their balance and ended up in the gutter. If only they had stuck to the plan written in these pages, much would be different now. But that is greed for you." Talis rose up, pulling the book out from the fireplace completely unscathed before continuing. "However, you are wrong about it being better off burned. It's a hot enough read without the extra fire." Handing the book to Freya, he asked, "Do you want your turn?" "No," Freya said politely, gently turning the book away. "I have all I want right here." Talis returned the book to the lectern. "Then we are done here. I will take you to another room." Everyone looked back at the book, yearning to read it. But before the will of one of them could break, the room was plunged into darkness with only the moonlight and a few well-placed candles left lighting the library.